So when you hear a title like this, when you hear words like disclosure, privacy, consent, what do you immediately think of? I'm sure compliance, risk, regulation, all bubble up to the top of your mind. And that's a good start. It means at least we're trying to do the minimum by customers. We think about insurance as being compliant. But so often, it also means we're abdicating the responsibility and the thought of these issues to other parts of our respective organisations. Hi, my name is Michael Storozhev, and I've been designing insurance products for the better part of the last decade. Whether it's for traditional models, digital-first ideas, startups, mobile only. After spending my formative years in a traditional actuarial role at traditional insurance companies, building and working with traditional models, I felt something missing. And for me, that something was the customer. In the back office role, it's always someone else's responsibility. It's always someone else's job to talk, to deal with, and most importantly, to listen to customers. And so, since then, over the last 8 or so years, I've made it my priority to connect as much as possible with our customers, to better understand those that deal with them on a day-to-day basis. But building a relationship with customers requires a simple yet powerful word: trust. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a compliance specialist, so you won't hear today advice about any specific legislation or views about how best to be compliant with individual regulation. Instead, today, I'll share some of my experiences on how we as actuaries can remain not only relevant in conversations around disclosure, consent, and privacy, but also add value from a more holistic viewpoint. I'll share practical examples. And if you want the legal and compliance view, talk to your teams, because everyone will be slightly different. Everyone will have different markets, different appetite that they have to deal with. So, to achieve that, let's go on a journey. A journey that spans the last 2 decades of remarkable transformation in the insurance industry and how trust has changed over that time. Back in the late 90s and early noughties, where insurance made its digital debut, websites and online portals were introduced, bringing about a new era of convenience and simplicity. However, trust was put to the test, as customers had to believe that these digital tools were reliable and secure, as opposed to the agents and brokers that they were used to dealing with in person. The innovators learnt that it was not just about replicating the offline process on a new website. There was something missing about that interaction, the personal experiences that customers were used to. Yet for many players, this took many years to learn. As we moved into the late noughties and early teens, the rise of mobile technology and social media reshaped the industry. Social media started playing a key role in marketing strategies. It was a new dawn for customer engagement, but we saw less innovation in underwriting as ethical concerns on how insurers would use our digital footprint. And in fact, Apple and Google became pseudo-regulators in their control of policies, of app stores that could change and did change insurance models overnight. But in all that time, as we went back to even in the last few years in the mid-teens with insurtech startups, in the late teens when insurers began using new data sources like smart home gadgets, Internet of Things, wearables, we didn't see products adapt as much. What we did saw definitively, though, was that in a journey of changing distribution, a one-size-fits-all model was not enough. Insurers' requirements of trust changed with customers' expectations. And insurance is and has always been all about trust. It's at the core of so many things we do. Insurance is no exception. But there's a harsh reality. We often fail to uphold that covenant. And how does that reflect upon us? We don't have to look far to get the answer. The insurance industry has persistently been deemed as one of the least trusted sectors. Looking around the globe, just 1 in 5 customers across the US, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Switzerland consider insurers trustworthy. In the UK, 2/3 of customers believe their insurer will do what it can to avoid handing them over money at claim time, which for all of us in the room should be a remarkable figure, considering that 98% of all claims in most categories are paid out. Rules, regulation, laws, they're not our enemies. They're tools of safeguarding the trust placed in our industry. And their primary function? To ensure customers retain that trust they invest in us. And if we, as the insurance industry, falter in upholding this faith, compliance, regulation will always strengthen to match the expectations of the customer. There's just no such thing as regulatory arbitrage. And so, in my experience, I see trust as a triad of comprehension, transparency, and alignment when you're talking about designing and building insurance products. I promised this would not be a talk about regulation. So for each of these pillars, instead I'm hoping to share, as I said, some of the practical learnings and collaborations required to build either digital, in-person, or mobile-first products. So let's start off with comprehension. It's essential to ask ourselves, are our customers truly aware of what they're purchasing? We might argue that our plain English policy wordings should be enough. After all, isn't each customer going to read through them? Theoretically, yes. We've all seen the ubiquitous checkboxes that require customers to state that they've read and understood the policy that they're buying. That's what compliance want, right? So we're in the clear. And you see a couple of examples out there. They might do it in slightly different ways, but achieving the same thing. But let's look at some surprising facts. Research from the Insurance Council of Australia tells a very different story. Among all customers, 49 will confess that they never even glance at the policy before buying a policy. Of the remaining 51 that do, a meager 19% attempt to even read the crucial parts of the policy. And distressingly, when tested, most showed a poor understanding of policy exclusions and limits. And so, of course, there's a viewpoint that insists we have to double down on making sure that customers read and understand the policy wording. And I've heard numerous ideas and compliance-based solutions to achieve this, from making it mandatory to click the actual link to the policy wording before you can check the box, or after you press I agree, you get another pop-up with the policy wording again displayed for you. But that leads to more clicks. Does that lead to more attention? Does that lead to more comprehension? Instead, customers themselves tell us that wording is hard to understand. It's too detailed, confusing, unclear, long. Merely adding more checkboxes won't solve this. We need to rethink, reinvent, and truly reinforce our customers' comprehension. And there's a very simple reason for this. Customers limit their focus given cognitive load. They limit the information they seek from an insurer to buy a policy because there's just too much of it. We make it too hard for them to get that information. Is that really building trust? So instead, let's imagine a world where customers did not need to read the policy wording. A world where every benefit, every choice is presented not as an intimidating wall of text, but as a conversation. And so I'll share an example from a mobile-first product, which I've had collaboration with in the past, where we've looked to conceptualize the idea of radical comprehension at each step of the purchase path. The approach to thinking about it is, don't just ask the question. Give the customer the specific tools they need to answer the question. And so for each step of the journey, give more information. Don't just ask a question about an optional add-on, for example, like, would you like ski cover? But then go forward and actually say, what is it supposed to cover? And importantly, what it's not going to cover. And you'll see in these examples that the language is deliberately designed to be much more simple than the policy wording. And that is deliberate. It's to create a conversation with a customer as opposed to disclosing information to them. And you'll even see there a reference to the PDS. It doesn't actually say, declare you've read the PDS. Have a coffee and read that PDS. There's still reference later on to the policy wording. There's still a checkbox requiring you to make sure that you've read it. But you're trying to give the customer the tools beforehand to make that decision. And so working with design and engineering to see how best to inject these sorts of ideas into the purchase path provides these sort of opportunities. It's not just a cookie cutter approach of taking a web policy and applying it into a mobile product. And each of these solutions will be quite different between a distributed product, whether it's through a website, an insurance agent, or a mobile app. Next, let's touch a little bit on transparency. The number one reason trust is destroyed is surprise. Yet why is fine print such a common concept? It's like a secret code, almost impenetrable, nested away in the pages of policy wordings, existing but rarely visited. But should it really be this way? So let's have a look. When do you first talk about the fine print in a purchase path? In 2020, almost every customer review of a travel insurance policy was negative. Customers were caught up by the fine print of the pandemic exclusions. Waste of money, scam, made a stressful situation infinitely worse. Those are some of the actual comments from customers on public product review websites that year. But one interesting outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic was that for travel insurers to be much more open and transparent with pandemic exclusions, coverage for COVID-19 and other known events. And we see major travel insurers in Australia have specific screens before you see the quoted price to make it clear what part of COVID-19 is and isn't covered. Some have it on the homepage, others surface it at a separate page. And it's a good step. You're being more transparent with customers. And you might lose some sales, but at least you're not having the complaints later on. But what we saw was that customers were not absorbing that information. It looked and felt a bit bland, a blob of text, a typical disclosure. And when you look at customers, there is such a thing as disclosure fatigue. Yes, we might be more compliant, but if customers were not reading it, were we really building trust? And so let's reimagine some of that fine print. Instead of making it feel and sound and look like a compliance requirement, instead have a conversation. And so one of the examples that we played around with was around instead injecting color, white space, bold heading, and importantly, balance into this disclosure. Yes, we wanted customers to know what they weren't covered for, but at the same time, by providing the balance of what they were covered for, it meant that customers spent much more time reading that screen, absorbing the information, and not being surprised later on. It made insurance not just about the policy, it made it a bit less daunting for customers to address. And so when I think about approaches to disclosing this sort of information, I always go through a series of questions just to try and make sure that it's appropriate for customers. Mostly the first one, would I even read it? And then going on from there. We still want to make sure it's compliant, that's the last one, but at the same time, work with others in the organization, especially design, especially UX, to understand how to convey the information you think is important in a better way to customers. Finally, let's touch a little bit on alignment. And alignment here, for me, is about what data do you use and what do customers believe you're using their data for. And consider this, how many of us have delved into our own organization's privacy policy? We require our customers to read it. You know, there's a checkbox for it, of course. But do we know what it says? Who here has honestly read their privacy policy? I was hoping for a few more. And I'm not surprised though. These policies are long. In fact, there was actually an art exhibition a few years back. It was one of Chris's papers, in fact, that talked about how long it takes to read some of these popular privacy policies of apps. But the insurance industry isn't much better. We did a survey of insurance privacy policies in Australia, and they showed that it takes about 5 to 20 minutes to read each one. And shorter isn't necessarily better. Some of the briefest policies were quite scant on detail, leaving customers shrouded in confusion about how their data is being collected and used. And now if you add the challenge of comprehending them, almost all required a university education to understand. Yet these are the policies we require customers to absorb so that they know what data we use and for what purpose and with whom we share it with. And so, when you think about those three questions, as actuaries and insurance professionals, we should know that privacy policy like the back of our hand. It outlines how we can work with the data. It outlines how we can build products that leverage and innovate on a data-centric approach. It's just going to become a lot more important as we start looking at the new wave of data we're getting through AI, through big data. The survey also looked at some of the reasons, and I'll let you touch on those in your own time. The presentation is made available afterwards. But the one area I do want to touch on is how to deal with sensitive information, specifically with geolocation. Location data isn't classified as sensitive information, but most customers, most of the public are very reserved with it. Rule of thumb, single-digit opt-in if you can't declare a clear value exchange. So what happens when you build an insurance product that requires location information, say from an app? This could be from a motor telematics product or a usage-based travel insurance product. We've seen plenty of those in the market in the last few years. Again, how do you have a conversation with a customer about what will define the success of adoption? We've all seen the default permission screen. Most of the time, I click don't allow because there is absolutely no context. I still don't know why connecting my headphones requires my location. Seriously, boss, why do you need my location at all times? Best practice states to create your own screen and provide some reasons for the use of the data. But again, we've all seen those. We kind of skim past them, press yes or no based on our assumptions. And so the area where I've seen experimentation in the past with is how do you capture someone's attention during the onboarding process? And using things like short, punchy, or even slightly dangerous language can help with customers spend enough time on the screen to understand. Part of that screen is about making sure that you show the use cases that your data will be used for, and also importantly, provide that balance, what the data will not be used for. That's the sort of balance that creates trust. And I'll let each of you decide whether keeping a non-creepy eye on you will pass your own brand test, but they're the sort of punchy conversations you can have with customers to quickly grab attention so that then they start understanding what you're trying to have a conversation with them about. And a lot of these ideas You should not always get a chance to implement all of them. There might be constraints around distribution, constraints around systems, conflicting customer expectations. But by knowing what other providers are doing, knowing the regulations, gives us a chance to have a productive conversation with risk, compliance, other parts of the business. And so trust for me is all about building on comprehension, transparency, and alignment. Our responsibility is not simply to meet compliance requirements, but exceed them by ensuring that our customers truly understand and agree with our practices. In an era of digital transformation, we need to rethink how we present information, making it clear, accessible, and concise. So every click, every call, every interaction is a chance for us to build trust, strengthen relationships, and reaffirm our commitment to our customers. So let's strive not only to offer insurance policies, but to build bridges of trust. Because at the end of the day, insurance is and has always been and will be all about trust. Thank you. Any questions? I'm more than happy to discuss. And always an interesting conversation for me, so feel free to connect, discuss, and if you scan that, it goes to my I think it's LinkedIn. So.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the very interesting presentation. We do have some questions, and I trusted the audience that they will have some. So,
are they from the audience or from ChatGPT?
We could ask them afterwards, no. Again, thank you very much. I'll start with one question. You spoke a lot about user experience and how to improve user experience and how much really the responsibility for this is with the one who designs the product. So coming back to the overall topic, how do you think can AI help us with improving the user experience?
That's a great point. And I said right at the start, I'm not a compliance specialist. I'm also not a user experience specialist. But I love collaborating with all parts of the business, including these professionals. The ideas that you get are phenomenal. The ways of implementing are diverse. And so you'll never be able to get just one answer. But what I do love about this ability to, where we're coming from in terms from AI, is the level of data we're getting through being able to test ideas, to be able to experiment different parts of the user experience is something we've never seen. So AI is giving us a greater chance to not only experiment and understand, but better see what the customers actually want themselves. And as you start analyzing, make the marketing team almost your best friend. For any kind of young actuary, the moment you start talking to your marketing team and realize what GA stands for, it opens up a trove of data you've never seen before. And that data, compounded with advanced analytics, with AI to help with the analysis of it, can help answer some of those questions that otherwise would be like trying to sit down a customer in front of you and bombard them with question after question.
Wonderful, thank you. I would like to take one question from the audience and bring something else into the equation. Why cyber attacks being more prevalent? Should we be focusing more on how we are protecting data as opposed to how we are using the data?
Data protection is probably one of the biggest topics we need to grapple with right now. It was amazing. The Australian Actuaries Institute did a collaboration last year with the Australian Human Rights Commission. And we had the Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, help launch the collaboration we did, which was all about providing guidance to the insurance sector on how we could better meet the requirements of anti-discrimination legislation. And there was one quote that stuck out from her launch, and that is, where we've got data, we have risk. And so we cannot take away the inherent risk we have from collecting data. And so that's why when I was talking about the privacy policy, it's so important for all of us to take a step back and have a think about what data do we have? What data do we have access to? Are we using it for the right purpose? And especially when we're talking about things like sensitive information, that's quite, it's medical histories, that's ethnicity, that's, in my view, location as well. Is there a way we can do the exact same modeling, the exact same solution, without relying on that data? If we can, let's not collect it. Let's not expose ourselves to the risk of data protection. So we all are having those conversations internally, making an assessment of, is there a better way of solving the same problem with less data, is something we'll start having to do much more in the future.
Good, thank you. Perhaps one last question before we see you back again at the end. Customers have actively selected to opt out of flood cover through the sales process. It is largely unambiguous, so comprehended and transparent. What are your thoughts on this in relation to your presentation?
You know, it's such a difficult conversation about how to structure the purchase path and give customers not only the choice, but the trust in that what they're buying is what they're expecting to buy. And we've seen different models, regulatory models, come through over the last decade. There were opt-in models, there were opt-out models that essentially seem to have gone away now, thankfully. Opt-out is where it's pre-selected and you just have to remove it. But there were also opt-select models, where nothing is, you couldn't go forward unless you made a choice. Now, none of the models, I think, are a silver bullet. None of the models, by themselves, will make sure that customers have the trust and the understanding they need to make the decision. And that's why when I was showing the example about providing more information, in any of those models, that is the missing piece, in my view, in a lot of purchase parts, in a lot of quote screens, that you're expecting customers to know what you already know. And so have a rethink, no matter whether it's an opt-in model, whether it's an opt-select model, do customers have the tools they need to make that decision? If they don't, let's have a think about how to get that information to them. And I was talking about in the context of travel insurance, but it's just as important in any product, especially a retail product, when there are multiple choices that a customer has to make. Because the more choices you make, the easier it is to overwhelm a customer. And as soon as a customer's overwhelmed, they're looking at one thing and one thing only, and that's the price. We shouldn't be focusing on that.
Thank you very much, Michael.